In a well-maintained suburb lived a family whose only child was born more by chance than by heartfelt desire. The parents, both successful business people, had completely dedicated their lives to their careers and their joint company. The family business flourished through their tireless work and grew steadily, while their son faded into the background. In the boy's early years, his parents still showed interest in his development. They photographed his first steps, applauded his first words, and proudly presented him to their business partners. However, with each passing year, as he grew older and his childlike cuteness faded, so did their attention. Television became his constant companion. In the mornings before school, he sat alone at the breakfast table while his parents were already at the office. After school, an empty house greeted him. He completed his homework without parental support, sharing his successes and failures with no one. His teachers became his most important role models. They were the only adults who recognized his potential and encouraged him. Birthdays passed like ordinary days. His parents would leave an envelope with money on the kitchen table, along with a hastily written note telling him to buy something nice. Christmas, traditionally a family celebration, became a painful reminder of his loneliness. After much pleading, his parents allowed him to buy an artificial Christmas tree, which he would set up and decorate alone each year. His family's relatives lived scattered across the country. There was no contact with them, not even photographs or stories about them. The neighborhood was mainly populated by older couples whose own children had long since moved out. Thus, he grew up in an adult world, never experiencing the warmth of a real family. His parents spent their evenings at business dinners and networking events. When they came home late, their son was already in bed. Weekend conversations revolved exclusively around business, and his attempts to talk about school were met with polite disinterest. In this atmosphere of emotional coldness, he learned early on to suppress his needs for affection and attention. At 16, he gathered the courage to ask his parents for a part-time position in their company. He hoped that working together would finally help him build a connection with them. The rejection came swiftly and unequivocally. There were no positions available. The message behind this excuse hit him hard. They didn't want him in their business world, not even for simple auxiliary work. On his 18th birthday, his parents confronted him with their expectation that he should move out as soon as possible. The fact that he was still in school and only had a small part-time job didn't interest them. They no longer saw him as a responsibility, but as a burden to be shed. After his graduation, the underlying pressure turned into an official eviction notice. A yellow envelope on his bed contained the formal request to vacate the house within 30 days. No discussion, no help with moving, not even a conversation about his future plans. He had to ask a friend's father for help transporting his few belongings. The only affordable accommodation was a tiny one-room apartment on the outskirts of town. The plaster crumbled from the walls, the heating worked only sporadically, and at night, the neighbors' noises penetrated through the thin walls. His retail job salary barely covered rent and food. Attending university was out of the question. The situation worsened when his supervisor at the store began a personal vendetta against him. Groundless warnings accumulated until termination followed. Job hunting proved difficult, and his savings dwindled. After 3 months, he could no longer pay the rent. The eviction from his apartment happened as quickly and mercilessly as his previous expulsion from his parents' home. In desperation, he bought a tent with his last money. A sympathetic property owner allowed him to pitch it in his backyard. Winter set in, and temperatures dropped below freezing. His former school friends were now studying in other cities while he tried to survive on odd jobs and food donations. The nights in the tent became torture, and the struggle for survival consumed his every thought. The turning point in his life came when Martha, an observant neighbor of his parents, discovered him leaving his tent one morning. Without hesitation, she took him into her home. In her warm kitchen, over a cup of hot coffee, she listened to his story. Her outrage at his parents' behavior transformed into active support. Martha pulled every string to obtain his grandparents' contact information. His parents initially blocked every attempt, refusing to provide any information. Only Martha's persistent presence and her unveiled threat to take the story to the local press made them relent. With trembling hands, they handed over a list of phone numbers and addresses, coupled with the icy demand never to contact them again. The call to his paternal grandparents changed everything. The first minutes of the conversation were marked by incredulous silence. They hadn't seen their grandson since he was an infant and didn't even know his face. When they learned of his situation, they acted immediately. Within a week, they organized a flight, personally picked him up from the airport, and brought him to their spacious house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. His grandparents proved to be the exact opposite of his parents. They fully integrated him into their lives, supported his educational plans, and showed genuine interest in his development. Their indignation at the behavior of their own son and his wife led to a radical step. They called their lawyer and changed their will. Their entire estate would go to their grandson. Living with his grandparents enabled him to attend community college. For the first time, he experienced what it felt like to be part of a real family. His grandmother insisted on celebrating his achievements, while his grandfather became his mentor and advisor. In their house, he found not just a roof over his head, but a true home. When his grandparents decided to move south to escape the cold, they surprised him with an extraordinary offer. They sold him their house for a third of its market value. This generous gesture enabled him to start his adult life independently, this time with a solid foundation and the support of a loving family. The house became his anchor, a tangible symbol of his journey from homelessness to a self-determined life. After a 2-week business trip, he returned to his house and froze at the sight of a white delivery van in his driveway. His parents' company logo was emblazoned on the vehicle's side. Inside the house, he found his parents, who had made themselves at home as if it were their own. They greeted him with an eerie casualness that only intensified his anger. The story of their bankruptcy unfolded in fragmentary explanations. Their company had gone bankrupt, and debts had forced them to sell almost everything. The delivery van and some personal belongings were all they had left. In their twisted logic, they viewed his grandparents' former house as their rightful refuge. His call to the police proved futile. His parents presented a perfectly rehearsed story about a verbal rental agreement, claiming they had been living there for weeks. Without video surveillance or witnesses, it was one word against another. The officers declared it a family matter and referred him to the legal process of eviction. Pandemic-related delays in the justice system forced him to tolerate his parents for months. They paid a ridiculous amount for utilities, $100 monthly, accompanied by condescending remarks about their generosity. Every attempt to negotiate reasonable rent was dismissed, with manipulative accusations about the costs of their 18 years of parenting. His mother used her free time to redesign the house according to her preferences. She tried to rearrange furniture, demanded the master bedroom for herself and his father, and treated him like a subordinate roommate. His father, who had taken a job as a delivery driver, spent most of his time away from home, but regularly appeared to support his wife's demands. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Every evening, he returned to a home that felt like hostile territory. His parents alternated between aggressive justification of their presence and icy silence. They used every opportunity to emphasize their supposed rights as parents and undermine his position as homeowner. The situation became an exhausting power struggle, with his parents trying to restore their former authority while he fought for control over his own home. After 4 grueling months, he finally reached the court hearing. His parents appeared with a transparent defense strategy, invoking family ties and their supposed rights to his grandparents' former house. The judge saw through their argumentation and ordered a 30-day eviction period, a ruling his parents received with incredulous dismay. The final days in the house evolved into an emotional war zone. His parents alternated between desperate manipulation attempts and icy rejection. He countered their strategy by hanging a calendar in the living room, demonstratively crossing off each passing day with a red marker. The last day stood out as a large red circle, an unmistakable message of their running time. They had delayed their search for new accommodation until the last moment, convinced they could still change his mind. The only available apartment turned out to be a rundown studio in the neighboring town. Green walls, worn carpet, a window overlooking a brick wall, and noisy neighbors formed a stark contrast to their former life. On moving day, they demanded the furniture from the guest room, the double bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV. He wordlessly surrendered these items, wanting nothing that they had touched. While they loaded their final belongings into the delivery van, he demonstratively began changing all the locks in the house. The final twist in their story came unexpectedly. Just a few months later, they established a new company, similar to their old business model. The positive online reviews and growing customer base testified to their returning success. They had fought their way back to prosperity from nothing, without ever showing remorse for their behavior. His grandparents reported receiving a call from his parents, bragging about their new success. The irony of their situation was unmistakable. After everything they had done to him, his homelessness, their brazen house occupation, they effortlessly returned to their privileged life. His last contact with them was limited to blocking their phone numbers and social media profiles. The emotional scars of their years of neglect and later audacity remained, while they continued their lives as if nothing had happened.